Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below, and if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. Now, back to Clara Bennett. He thought she was just a maid. A quiet black woman in a pressed gray uniform, moving between crystal glasses and silver trays as if she were part of the furniture. Someone paid to disappear. Someone expected to lower her eyes, swallow every insult, and keep walking. But that night, inside the Valeni mansion, Dominic Valeni was about to learn that the smallest act of respect could expose the ugliest truth in the room. The engagement party glittered like a dream built on money. Golden chandeliers poured warm light over marble floors. Violin music floated from the balcony. Champagne towers shimmered beneath carved ceilings, and every guest wore wealth like armor. Diamond necklaces, tailored tuxedos, silk gowns whispering across the stone. At the center of it all stood Victoria Hale, Dominic's fiancée. Beautiful, polished, perfectly dressed in ivory satin, with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. She moved through the room like she already owned it. The mansion, the guests, the name Valeni, and the man beside her. Dominic stood near the grand fireplace, dressed in black, silent as a shadow. People feared him before they respected him. That was the nature of his world. One word from him could close businesses and alliances or make powerful men reconsider their entire future. Yet tonight, he wore a faint smile, the kind a man wears when he believes the evening is under control. Then Clara entered with a tray of champagne. She walked carefully, both hands steady beneath the silver tray. Her natural curls were pinned back neatly. Her shoes were simple. Her uniform was clean but old at the cuffs, the kind that had been washed too many times. Nobody noticed her at first. That was how Clara survived. She had learned long ago that invisible women heard the most and were protected the least. So she moved quietly. She served. She stepped aside. She never asked questions inside houses where men whispered behind locked doors. But as she passed the circle of guests surrounding Victoria, a hand suddenly shot out. Victoria lifted a glass from the tray, then paused. Her eyes slid over Clara from head to toe. "Well," Victoria said loudly, "Dominic really does hire anyone these days." The nearby guests chuckled. Clara lowered her gaze. "Would you like champagne, ma'am?" she asked softly. Victoria smiled wider. "Oh, listen to that. So polite." She turned to the women beside her. "They train them well, don't they?" A thin wave of laughter moved through the group. Clara's fingers tightened beneath the tray, but only for a second. She kept her face calm. She had bills waiting at home. A mother in a hospital bed. Medicine that cost more than her rent. She could not afford pride tonight. Victoria took one slow sip, then wrinkled her nose. "This is warm." Clara looked up slightly. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I can bring another glass." "No," Victoria stepped closer. "You can learn to do your job properly." The room softened into silence around them. Not the full silence of shock. Worse, the silence of people choosing entertainment over kindness. Victoria tilted her glass. Champagne spilled down the front of Clara's uniform. A few guests gasped. One man laughed under his breath. Clara stood frozen, cold liquid soaking into the fabric against her chest. She did not move. She did not cry. She only held the tray tighter, as if her dignity depended on keeping those glasses from shaking. From across the room, Dominic's smile began to fade. Victoria noticed him watching and laughed lightly, as though this were all harmless. "Oh, don't look so serious, darling," she said. "I'm only teaching the help a little discipline." Clara whispered, "I'll clean this up." She stepped back, but her heel touched the leg of a small antique table beside the fireplace. A silver brooch slipped from the table's velvet display and fell to the marble floor. The sound was tiny, a delicate metallic click, but Dominic heard it. His entire body went still. Victoria glanced down at the brooch, annoyed. Before Clara could reach for it, Victoria picked it up between two fingers as if it were dirty. "What is this ugly old thing?" she said. Clara's breath caught. Dominic's eyes darkened. No one else knew. No. One in that shining room understood that the small silver brooch in Victoria's hand had belonged to Dominic's mother, the only person who had ever taught him mercy. Victoria smirked. Then she dropped it, right at Clara's feet. "Pick it up," she said. "That's what you're here for." And the room went silent. 3 months before that silver brooch touched the marble floor, Clara Bennett had walked through the iron gates of the Valeni mansion with only $12 in her purse and a prayer she was too tired to say out loud. The mansion stood on the edge of Lake Michigan like something carved from old money and quiet danger. Tall windows watched the driveway. Stone lions guarded the entrance. Black cars lined the courtyard with engines still warm, and men in dark suits stood near the doors without smiling. Clara knew what kind of house this was before anyone told her. A house like this did not simply belong to a rich man. It belonged to a man people feared. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Alvarez, met Clara at the servants' entrance with a clipboard in one hand and warning in her eyes. "You speak only when spoken to," she said. "You don't ask about visitors. You don't enter the West Wing unless assigned. You never touch Mr. Valenti's private things. And above all, you do not make yourself memorable." Clara nodded. Memorable had never helped women like her. Invisible paid the rent. Invisible bought medicine. Invisible kept her mother alive another month. Her mother, Evelyn Bennett, had once been a school librarian with a laugh that filled rooms and hands that smelled of paper, lavender soap, and Sunday biscuits. Now those same hands trembled beneath hospital blankets while machines kept time beside her bed. Kidney failure had taken her strength slowly, then all at once. Bills arrived in white envelopes like small acts of cruelty. Clara worked mornings at a bakery, evenings cleaning offices, and weekends wherever someone would pay cash. But none of it had been enough. Then the Valenti job appeared. Live-in staff. Long hours. Excellent pay. No questions. Clara took it before fear could talk her out of survival. In the first week, she learned the rhythm of the mansion. The kitchen woke before sunrise. The guards changed shifts at 6. The library lights stayed on long after midnight. Men came in laughing and left pale. Sometimes Dominic Valenti's voice carried through closed doors, low, controlled, never raised, which somehow made it more frightening. Clara saw him only from a distance. A tall man in black suits, with dark hair brushed back and a stillness that made even powerful guests stand straighter. He was not loud. He did not need to be. The room adjusted itself around him. Once, in the dining room, Clara had been polishing silver when Dominic entered unexpectedly. She stepped aside so quickly her elbow struck the cabinet. A spoon fell. The sound rang through the room. She froze. Dominic looked at the spoon, then at her. For one breath, Clara thought she was finished. But he only bent down, picked it up, and placed it gently on the table. "You dropped this," he said. No anger. No insult. No threat. Just 4 quiet words. Then he walked away. That was the first time Clara wondered whether the monster people whispered about still had something human buried beneath all that power. But she did not let herself wonder long. Wondering was dangerous. By the second month, Clara had become part of the mansion's silence. She knew which guests tipped kindly and which ones left fingerprints on glasses just to watch her polish them again. She knew which guards missed their daughters and which ones had forgotten how to say thank you. She knew Mrs. Alvarez kept peppermint candies in her apron pocket for the younger maids who cried in storage rooms. And she knew Victoria Hale was trouble the first time she saw her. Victoria arrived one afternoon in a white coat, red bottom heels, and sunglasses she did not remove indoors. She looked around the mansion not with admiration, but inspection, as if deciding what she would replace once it became hers. Her first words to Clara were not hello. They were, "You. Take my coat." Clara took it. Not because Victoria deserved obedience. Because Clara's mother needed medicine. From that day forward, Victoria treated the staff like shadows that had offended her by existing. She complained about fingerprints no one could see. She sent soup back 3 times. She asked Clara whether she understood English, when Clara did not move fast enough. Clara endured all of it. Each insult became another folded bill in her mind. Another prescription. Another hospital visit. Another day her mother might open her eyes and smile. Every night, after the mansion slept, Clara sat on the small bed in her narrow room and called the hospital. "Is she comfortable?" Clara would ask. Some nights, her mother was awake enough to whisper, "Don't let rich people make you feel small, baby." Clara would close her eyes. "I won't, Mama." But promises were easier in the dark. Inside the Valenti mansion, under chandeliers bright enough to expose every stain, dignity had to be carried quietly. So Clara carried hers the only way she knew how, with steady hands, a lowered voice, and a heart that refused to become cruel just because cruelty surrounded it. The night of the engagement party began with rain. Not heavy rain, not the kind that cleansed streets or chased people indoors. Just a thin, cold drizzle that clung to the windows of the Valeni mansion like fingerprints. Outside, black cars rolled through the iron gates one after another, their headlights cutting through the mist. Inside, the house glowed with gold. Every chandelier had been polished until it looked like captured fire. White roses filled crystal vases along the grand staircase. A string quartet played from the upper balcony, soft and elegant, while waiters in black jackets moved through the crowd with trays of champagne. Clara Bennett stood near the service hallway, adjusting the cuffs of her gray uniform. Mrs. Alvarez inspected each member of the staff like a general preparing soldiers for war. "Tonight must be perfect," she said quietly. "No mistakes, no delays, no attention." Her eyes landed on Clara. "And Clara?" "Yes, ma'am. Stay away from Miss Hale unless she calls for you." Clara understood what that meant. Victoria had already arrived an hour earlier and sent back 2 flower arrangements, 3 appetizers, and 1 maid who had apparently breathed too loudly while hanging her coat. Clara nodded. "I'll be careful." Mrs. Alvarez's face softened for half a second. "Careful may not be enough tonight." Before Clara could answer, laughter floated in from the ballroom. Victoria Hale stood beneath the largest chandelier, surrounded by women in silk gowns and men holding champagne like trophies. Her ivory dress shimmered each time she moved. On her left hand, Dominic's engagement ring burned under the lights, a diamond so large it seemed almost cold. Dominic stood beside her, speaking to an older man in a navy suit. His expression was calm, but distant. Clara noticed that about him. Even in a crowded room, he seemed alone. Then Victoria saw Clara. Her smile changed. Not disappeared. Changed. It became brighter, sharper, meant for an audience. "You," Victoria called. Clara's stomach tightened. She stepped forward with the champagne tray balanced in both hands. "Yes, ma'am." Victoria lifted 1 glass, looked at it, then looked at Clara. "Tell me something," she said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Do they teach you people how to hold trays? Or is that just natural talent?" A few guests chuckled. Clara kept her face still. "I was trained by Mrs. Alvarez, ma'am." "Oh, how impressive," Victoria said, turning to her friends. "A professional tray holder." More laughter. The sound moved around Clara like cold air. She felt the familiar pull inside her chest, the instinct to shrink, to apologize for existing, to make herself smaller so the cruelty would pass over her. But the tray was heavy, and her hands had to remain steady. So she focused on the glasses. Not the faces. Not the laughter. Not Victoria's eyes. 1 glass at a time. Victoria stepped closer, the perfume around her sweet and expensive. "You know, Dominic has such a generous heart," she said. "He collects broken things. Old furniture, stray dogs, desperate staff." The guests laughed harder now. Someone whispered, "Victoria, stop," but the whisper had no courage in it. Dominic was across the room, still speaking, but Clara saw his gaze shift. He had heard something. Victoria saw it too. And instead of stopping, she performed. She reached for another glass. Clara moved the tray slightly to help her. Victoria let her fingers brush the stem, then released it too soon. The glass tipped. Champagne splashed across the front of Victoria's ivory dress. A gasp went through the circle. Clara froze. Victoria looked down at the stain, then slowly lifted her eyes. The room waited. Then Victoria smiled. A beautiful, terrible smile. "Oh my God," she said softly. "Look what she did." Clara's breath caught. "Ma'am, I didn't." Victoria raised 1 hand. "Don't lie to me." The words landed harder than a slap. Clara swallowed. "I'm sorry about the dress. I can bring a cloth right away." "A cloth," Victoria repeated, laughing as if Clara had said something stupid. "Do you think this is kitchen linen? This dress costs more than your mother's hospital bills." The room went still. Clara's eyes lifted. Only for a second, but it was enough. Victoria had meant to wound her. Not by accident. Not through careless cruelty. She had listened. She had learned. She had found the softest place in Clara's life and pressed her heel into it. Clara felt heat rise behind her eyes, but she refused to let a tear fall. "Not here. Not for them." She lowered the tray. "I'll get something to clean it," she whispered. Victoria stepped closer and took the tray from Clara's hands. For 1 foolish second, Clara thought the humiliation was over. Then Victoria tilted the entire tray. Champagne glasses slid off the silver surface and shattered across the marble floor. Crystal exploded at Clara's feet. The music faltered. Every head turned. Victoria held out the empty tray and said, loud enough for the whole ballroom to hear, "Clean it up. That's what you're paid for." Across the room, Dominic Valeni stopped speaking. His smile faded completely. And Clara Bennett stood in the center of all that gold and glass, surrounded by broken crystal, while the most powerful man in Chicago finally began to see the woman everyone else had chosen not to notice. For a moment, nobody moved. The broken champagne glasses glittered across the marble floor like pieces of ice. Golden light caught every shard, turning the mess into something almost beautiful, if not for the woman standing in the middle of it with champagne soaking, her uniform and humiliation burning behind her eyes. Clara Bennett did not cry. That was what made the room uncomfortable. People knew what to do with tears. Tears gave them permission to pity her, to whisper that Victoria had gone too far, to pretend their silence had not helped build the cruelty. But Clara gave them nothing easy. She simply bent down. Carefully, slowly. One knee touched the cold marble, then the other. A maid appeared from the service hallway with a broom, but Clara lifted one hand slightly. "I've got it," she whispered. Her voice was soft, but everyone heard it. Victoria folded her arms, satisfied. "Good," she said. "At least she understands instructions." A few guests looked away now. The laughter had grown weaker. Cruelty was fun only when it felt safe, only when the victim made it quick, only when the powerful person in the room kept smiling. But Dominic Valeni was no longer smiling. He stood across the ballroom, his champagne glass untouched in his hand, his dark eyes fixed on Clara. Not on Victoria, not on the shattered crystal. On Clara. He watched the way she gathered the broken pieces with her bare hands because she did not want anyone else to be cut. He watched the way she kept her back straight, even while kneeling. He watched the way her fingers trembled only when no one was supposed to notice. And something inside him shifted. It was not anger yet. Anger was easy. Dominic knew anger. He had built an empire from it, shaped it, sharpened it, taught men twice his age to fear the calm in his voice. This was different. This was recognition. Because Clara's silence reminded him of another woman. A woman who had once cleaned church floors at dawn before working night shifts at a diner. A woman who had worn the same silver brooch every Sunday, no matter how poor they were, because she said dignity needed no permission. His mother, Elena Valeni, the only person in his life who had ever looked at power and called it empty without kindness. Dominic's hand tightened around his glass. Victoria noticed. For the first time that evening, her smile flickered. "Oh, darling," she said lightly, crossing the room toward him. "Don't look so dramatic. It was just a little accident." Dominic did not answer. That silence should have warned her. But Victoria Hale had spent her life mistaking silence for approval. She turned back toward Clara, who was placing the larger shards onto the silver tray with careful hands. A thin red line had appeared across one of Clara's fingers, but she tucked it against her palm and kept working. Victoria's eyes narrowed. She had wanted tears. She had wanted begging. She had wanted Clara to break in front of everyone, so the room would know who held power. But Clara's quiet dignity was making Victoria look small. So Victoria reached for the nearest thing on the antique table beside the fireplace, a small velvet case Dominic had placed there earlier that evening. Mrs. Alvarez, standing near the service doors, went pale. "Miss Hale," she said quickly. "Please don't touch." Victoria opened the case. Inside lay a silver brooch shaped like a lily. It was old, delicate, and beautiful in a way that did not need diamonds. Its edges were worn smooth by time. A tiny pearl rested at the center, soft as moonlight. Victoria held it up and laughed. "What is this?" she said. "Another family relic? It looks like something from a thrift shop." The entire staff went still. Dominic's face changed. Not much. Only the smallest tightening of his jaw. But every man who worked for him saw it and stopped breathing. Clara looked up from the floor. She did not know what the brooch meant. She only saw Victoria holding something fragile with careless fingers. "Ma'am," Clara said gently, "please be careful with that." Victoria's eyes flashed. "Are you giving me orders now?" "No, ma'am. Because from where I'm standing, the maid on her knees should remember her place." The words moved through the room like smoke. Clara lowered her eyes again. But Victoria was not finished. She stepped closer, holding the brooch above the marble floor. "Since you like cleaning so much," Victoria said, smiling, "clean this too." Then she let it fall. The silver brooch struck the marble with a small, heartbreaking sound. Clara's breath caught. Dominic's glass cracked in his hand. And for the first time that night, fear entered Victoria Hale's eyes. The sound of cracking glass was soft. Almost nothing compared to the music, the whispering guests, the rain tapping against the tall windows. But everyone heard it. Dominic Valenti looked down at his right hand. The champagne glass had split beneath his grip, a thin fracture running through the crystal like lightning trapped in ice. Amber liquid slid over his knuckles and dripped onto the marble. No one spoke. Not the guests. Not the guards. Not even Victoria. For the first time since Clara Bennett had entered the ballroom, every person in the room understood that something had changed. The air had tightened. The golden light no longer felt warm. The chandeliers above them seemed suddenly too bright, exposing every cruel smile, every silent witness, every cowardly glance that had looked away while a woman was being humiliated. Clara did not see Dominic's hand. Her eyes were on the brooch. The small silver lily lay near her knee, one delicate edge bent from the fall. It looked painfully fragile against the cold marble. Clara did not know whose it was, but she knew what it was. Loved. Some objects carried that truth quietly. Not because they were expensive, not because they sparkled, but because time had touched them gently. Because someone had kept them safe through years of moving, grieving, surviving. Clara understood things like that. Her mother still kept Clara's first library card inside an old Bible. A worthless piece of plastic to anyone else. A treasure to Evelyn Bennett. Proof that her daughter had once stood on tiptoe at a counter and signed her name like it mattered. So Clara set the broken crystal aside. Then she reached for the brooch. "Don't," Victoria snapped. Clara's hand stopped. Victoria's voice shook now, though she tried to hide it behind arrogance. "I told you to clean it, not touch it like it's holy." Clara looked up. Slowly. Her eyes were wet, but steady. "Some things become holy," she said quietly, "because someone loved them." The words did not echo. They did not need to. They simply entered the room and stayed there. Dominic stopped breathing. For one impossible second, the ballroom disappeared. He was no longer standing beneath chandeliers in a mansion filled with powerful people. He was 9 years old again, sitting at a small kitchen table while his mother fastened that same silver lily to her black church dress. "Why do you wear that old thing, Mama?" he had asked. Elena Valenti had smiled at him in the cracked mirror. "Because your father gave it to me when he had nothing," she said. "A gift does not need to be expensive to be honorable." Dominic had not understood then. He understood now. He watched Clara lift the brooch from the floor with both hands. Not pinched between two fingers like Victoria had done. Not carelessly. Not like something beneath her. She lifted it as if it deserved gentleness. Then she took the clean corner of her apron and wiped away the dust. Her thumb moved carefully over the bent silver petal. The cut on her finger left the faintest mark, and she quickly folded her hand away, ashamed that she had stained it. Dominic saw that too. Something in his chest went cold. Not with rage. With shame. Because this woman, kneeling in front of his guests, had shown more respect to his mother's memory than the woman he had planned to marry. Victoria forced a laugh. "Oh, please," she said. "Are we all supposed to cry because the maid gave a speech?" No one laughed with her. That was when she finally understood she was alone. Dominic stepped forward. One step. Then another. The sound of his shoes against the marble carried through the ballroom like a verdict. Clara remained on her knees, the brooch resting in her open palms. When Dominic reached her, he did not look at Victoria. He looked at Clara. For the first time that night, the most feared man in Chicago lowered himself to one knee in front of his maid. A gasp moved through the guests. Dominic extended his hand, not to take the brooch from her, but to receive it with permission. Clara hesitated. Then she placed it gently in his palm. His fingers closed around it. "My mother wore this," he said. His voice was low, calm, dangerously calm. "The night she buried my father. The day she opened her first restaurant. And the morning she walked into a room full of men who thought they could speak down to her." His eyes lifted at last. They landed on Victoria. "She taught me that the way a person treats someone with no power over them is the only truth worth trusting." Victoria's lips parted. "Dominic, I didn't know." "No," he said. One word. The entire room froze. Dominic stood slowly, the silver lily resting against his palm. "You didn't know what it was," he said. "But you knew who she was." His gaze moved to Clara. "And you still chose cruelty." Victoria's face lost its color. Clara remained silent. But this time, her silence did not make her invisible. It made the whole room look at her. Victoria Hale stared at Dominic as if he had suddenly become a stranger. The man she knew was controlled, polished, dangerous, yes, but never emotional in public. He did not embarrass his own people in front of guests. He did not let servants affect the temperature of a room. He did not allow a maid on her knees to become the center of his engagement party. But Dominic Valeni was not looking at the room anymore. He was looking at the truth. And the truth was standing right in front of him in an ivory dress, pretending cruelty was elegance. Dominic, Victoria said softly, reaching for his arm. You're making this bigger than it is. His eyes dropped to her hand before it touched him. She stopped. That small hesitation said everything. Across the ballroom, Clara slowly rose to her feet. Mrs. Alvarez moved toward her, but Clara shook her head once. She did not want help standing. Not now. Not while everyone was watching. Her knees ached. Her uniform was stained. A thin line of blood marked one finger where the crystal had cut her. But her back remained straight. Dominic saw it. The guests saw it too. For the first time, they were not looking at Clara like staff. They were looking at her like a woman. Victoria noticed the shift and panic sharpened her voice. She ruined my dress, she said. She embarrassed me at my own engagement party. And now you're defending her because she touched some old pin. Dominic's face did not change. That old pin, he said, fed me when men with cleaner hands refused to give my mother credit. The room went still again. My mother wore it every day. In the kitchen of her first restaurant. She cooked 16 hours a day. She burned her hands, swallowed insults, smiled at people who called her by the wrong name, and still sent every employee home with food when they were hungry. Victoria blinked, thrown by the quietness in his voice. Dominic stepped closer. She was a servant before she was an owner. A waitress before she became a woman men begged to partner with. And she taught me never to confuse position with worth. His gaze moved over the guests. Some lowered their eyes. The men who had laughed earlier suddenly found their champagne glasses fascinating. The women who had smiled behind their hands now stood frozen beneath diamonds that no longer looked beautiful. Then Dominic turned back to Victoria. You did not mock Clara because she made a mistake, he said. You mocked her because you thought no one important would care. Victoria swallowed. That is not fair. No, Dominic said. What happened to her was not fair. He looked at Clara. For one brief moment, his expression changed. Something heavy passed through his eyes, regret, maybe, or recognition arriving too late. Miss Bennett, he said, his voice carrying through the ballroom. You should never have been treated that way in my house. Clara's lips parted, but no words came. No one had ever apologized to her like that before. Not in front of people. Not with her name attached to respect. Dominic turned to Mrs. Alvarez. Get a doctor for her hand. Clara immediately shook her head. Sir, it's only a small cut. Dominic looked at the blood on her finger. There is no such thing as a small wound when everyone watched it happen. That sentence landed harder than shouting. Mrs. Alvarez covered her mouth, eyes shining. Victoria laughed once, brittle and desperate. This is ridiculous, she said. You are humiliating me over a maid. Dominic finally looked at her left hand. The diamond ring caught the chandelier light, cold and sharp. No, he said. You humiliated yourself. Then he held out his hand. Victoria stared at him. The guest stopped breathing. Dominic, the ring. Her face drained of color. You can't be serious. I have never been. More serious. For several seconds, Victoria did not move. Then, with trembling fingers, she pulled the diamond from her hand. It resisted at the knuckle. The silence made the struggle unbearable. At last, the ring slipped free. She placed it in Dominic's palm. He closed his fingers around it, then turned to Luca, his head of security. Miss Hale will be escorted home. Victoria's mouth opened. No sound came out. The woman who had entered the mansion believing she would become queen of it was now standing without a ring, without applause, without power. Dominic faced the guests. This party is over. No one argued. Chairs scraped softly. Glasses were set down. The string quartet stopped playing. One by one, the wealthy and powerful filed toward the doors, their faces pale with the knowledge that they had laughed at the wrong woman. Clara stood near the broken crystal, unsure whether to move. Dominic approached her slowly. Not like a boss. Not like a man giving orders. Like someone walking toward a person he had failed to protect. He held out the silver brooch. My mother would have liked you, he said. Clara looked down at it, then up at him. For the first time, she did not lower her eyes. For the first time, Clara Bennett did not lower her eyes. Dominic Valeni noticed. So did Mrs. Alvarez. So did every guard standing along the walls, every server frozen near the doors, every guest pretending not to watch while still watching everything. Clara looked at the silver brooch in Dominic's hand, then at the man holding it. The same man whose name could empty rooms. The same man whose silence had frightened people more than shouting ever could. But in that moment, he did not look like a monster. He looked like a son holding the last gentle piece of his mother. I'm sorry, Clara said quietly. Dominic's brow tightened. For what? For the brooch, she answered. The edge is bent. I tried to. No, the word was soft, but final. Dominic looked down at the silver lily resting in his palm. One petal was bent, yes. A faint mark of blood touched the side where Clara's cut finger had brushed it. But somehow, that only made it feel more alive. You protected it, he said, when everyone else forgot what it deserved. Clara did not know how to respond to that. All her life, she had been praised for work, not worth. Good job. Clean room. Fast hands. Quiet girl. She knew how to accept instructions, corrections, complaints. She knew how to make herself useful. But respect was harder to hold. It felt unfamiliar in her hands. Mrs. Alvarez stepped forward with a folded white towel. Clara, your hand. Only then did Clara look down. The cut across her finger had opened again. A small red line trailed toward her wrist. It's fine, Clara whispered. Dominic's eyes hardened, not at her, but at the word. Fine. He had heard that word from women who were not fine. From his mother after 16 hours in a kitchen. From waitresses who smiled through insults. From people who learned to call pain inconvenience because the world had no patience for their suffering. He turned to Luca. Bring Dr. Moretti. Now. Luca nodded and disappeared through the side hall. Clara's mouth opened. Sir, that isn't necessary. Dominic looked at her. It is necessary in my house. The words settled over the remaining staff like a new rule being written into the walls. Not because he raised his voice. Because he did not. Outside, car doors closed one after another as the last guests left through the rain. No laughter followed them. No music. No congratulations. Only the soft hiss of tires on wet gravel and the uncomfortable silence of people leaving a place where their true faces had been seen. Victoria was gone. Her perfume still lingered faintly in the ballroom, sweet and expensive, but the woman herself had vanished through the front doors without the ring, without Dominic's arm, without the future she had already decorated in her mind. The broken crystal still covered part of the floor. Clara looked at it instinctively. I should finish cleaning, she said. Dominic followed her gaze. For a second, something like disbelief crossed his face. Then regret. No, he said. Clara blinked. But it's my job. Not tonight. He turned toward the staff gathered near the service hallway. No one touches this room until morning. Mrs. Alvarez stared at him. Mr. Valeni? Leave it. His eyes moved over the shattered glass, the spilled champagne, the white roses, the abandoned chairs, the place where Victoria had stood smiling. Some messes need to be seen before they're cleaned. No one argued. Clara stood very still. She understood then that he was not talking only about the floor. A few minutes later, Dr. Moretti arrived with a black medical bag and careful hands. Clara sat near the fireplace while he cleaned the cut on her finger. She tried not to flinch. Dominic stood a few feet away, the brooch still in his hand, watching quietly. When the doctor wrapped the small bandage, Clara whispered, Thank you. Dr. Moretti smiled gently. You're welcome, Miss Bennett. Miss Bennett. Not girl. Not maid. Not you. Her name sounded different when spoken with dignity. After the doctor left, Clara rose too quickly. I should go back to the staff quarters. Dominic nodded once, but before she could leave, he said, Clara. She stopped. He had used her first name before, but this time, there was no command in it. Only wait. My mother used to say a house reveals its owner by how the quietest person inside it is treated. Clara turned slowly. Dominic looked around the ruined ballroom. Tonight, my house answered poorly. The rain tapped against the windows. Clara held her bandaged hand close to her chest. Then, softly, she said, a house can learn. Dominic looked at her. For the first time that night, the silence between them did not feel dangerous. It felt like the beginning of judgment. And maybe, the beginning of mercy. By morning, the Valeni mansion looked different. The chandeliers still hung above the ballroom. The marbles still shone beneath the pale light coming through the tall windows. The white roses still stood in their crystal vases, though some had begun to bow at the edges, bruised by the long night. But the broken glass remained on the floor. Dominic had ordered it left there. Every shard, every stain, every silver tray lying where it had fallen. The servants moved around the ballroom carefully, speaking in whispers, as if the room had become a chapel for something that had died there. Not love, not celebration, but illusion. Victoria Hale had been gone for less than 12 hours, yet her absence felt like a curtain pulled back. And what stood behind it was ugly. Dominic entered the kitchen just after sunrise. The entire staff froze. He had never come there before. Not like this. Not alone. Not without guards clearing the way. In the Valeni mansion, the kitchen was the kingdom of invisible people. Cooks, maids, dishwashers, drivers. Women who knew every secret but owned no part of the house they kept alive. Dominic stood in the doorway, wearing the same black shirt from the night before, sleeves rolled to his forearms. His face looked as though he had not slept. Mrs. Alvarez stepped forward. "Mr. Valeni? Where is Clara?" A young maid near the sink looked down quickly. Mrs. Alvarez hesitated. "She left early, sir." Dominic's expression hardened. "Left? To visit her mother at St. Agnes Hospital. She goes every morning before her shift when she can." Something moved behind Dominic's eyes. He had known Clara needed money. Everyone in his house needed money. That was why they worked. But he had not known the shape of her need. He had not known it had a hospital bed, a tired mother, and a daughter who worked until her feet swelled just to keep the lights of one life from going out. Mrs. Alvarez opened a drawer and removed a folded envelope. "She asked me to give you this if you came looking for her." Dominic took it. Inside was a handwritten note, the letters neat but slightly uneven. "Mr. Valeni, I apologize for the trouble caused at your engagement party. I also apologize if my actions embarrassed your family. I will pay for the damaged glasses from my wages. Thank you for calling the doctor. Respectfully, Clara Bennett." Dominic read the note once. Then again. The kitchen disappeared around him. She had been humiliated in front of a room full of rich people. Cut by broken crystal. Made to kneel beneath laughter. And still, by morning, she was apologizing for the glasses. Dominic folded the note slowly. His jaw tightened. Who told Victoria about Clara's mother? No one answered. Not at first. Then a younger maid named Ruth lifted her hand slightly, her face pale. "I heard Miss Hale asking questions last week," she whispered. "About Clara. About why she needed extra shifts. I thought she was just being curious." Dominic's eyes sharpened. Who answered her? Ruth swallowed. One of the event planners. She said Clara's mother was sick. That Clara would do anything to keep this job. The kitchen went silent. Dominic understood then. Victoria had not found Clara's wound by accident. She had searched for it, and then she used it in public. That was not arrogance. That was cruelty with preparation. Dominic turned toward Luca, who had appeared quietly behind him. "Find every vendor connected to Victoria Hale. Every planner. Every account. Every favor my name opened for her." Luca nodded once. And then, Dominic's voice was calm. "Close the doors." No one needed him to explain. In his world, some punishments arrived without shouting. Invitations disappeared. Contracts ended. Calls went unanswered. Rooms that once opened easily became walls. Victoria Hale would wake up wealthy, but not protected, not connected, not Valeni. Dominic looked back at Mrs. Alvarez. "When Clara returns, send her to my mother's garden." Mrs. Alvarez blinked. "The East Garden?" "Yes. Sir, no staff member is allowed there." Dominic looked toward the hallway, where morning light stretched across the marble like a blade. "That changes today." 2 hours later, Clara Bennett walked through the East Garden gate wearing the same gray uniform, now clean but carefully mended at the sleeve. Her bandaged finger rested against her palm. She moved with the quiet caution of someone expecting punishment. Dominic stood beneath an old magnolia tree. In his hand was the silver brooch. He had repaired the bent petal as best he could, but the mark remained. A small scar on silver. Clara stopped several feet away. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Dominic turned. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he held out her note. "You apologized for broken glasses." Clara lowered her eyes. They were expensive. So was the silence in that room. Her eyes lifted. Dominic stepped closer, but not enough to crowd her. "You will not pay for anything." Clara opened her mouth. He raised one hand. Gently. And you will not lose your job. Relief passed over her face so quickly she tried to hide it. Dominic saw that too. My mother built this garden after men laughed at her first restaurant, he said. She planted lilies because she said they grow clean even out of dirt. Clara looked at the flowers swaying in the morning wind. Dominic placed the silver brooch into a small velvet box. I want you to keep this safe until tonight. Clara froze. Me? Yes. Mr. Valenti, I can't take something that belonged to your mother. You already honored it more than anyone in that room. Clara's eyes softened, but fear remained there. Why tonight? Dominic looked back toward the mansion. Because tonight, everyone who laughed is coming back. Clara's breath caught. Dominic's face became still. And this time, they will listen. That evening, the Valenti mansion opened its doors again. But this time, there was no music. No champagne tower. No white roses pretending everything was beautiful. The ballroom had been cleaned, but not restored. Dominic had ordered the broken crystal placed in a glass bowl at the center of the room. Every shattered piece from the night before sat beneath the chandelier, catching the light like frozen evidence. The guests arrived quietly. One by one, they stepped through the grand doors wearing the same expensive clothes, the same diamonds, the same polished smiles, but none of them looked comfortable now. They had expected an apology, perhaps a private explanation. Maybe Dominic Valenti would say grief had overcome him. Maybe he would excuse Victoria's behavior as stress. Maybe he would smooth the whole scandal over because powerful families did not like public shame. But Dominic was not there to protect their comfort. He stood beside the fireplace in a black suit, the silver brooch pinned to his lapel. Clara Bennett stood near the east doors, hands folded in front of her gray uniform. Mrs. Alvarez had asked if she wanted to wear something else, something more formal, something that would help her feel less exposed. Clara had said no. The uniform was what they had mocked. So the uniform was what they would answer to. When she entered the ballroom, conversations died immediately. Some guests looked at the floor. Some looked at Dominic. A few tried to offer polite smiles, the kind people use when they want forgiveness without confession. Dominic let the silence stretch. Then he spoke. Last night, he said, a woman was humiliated in this room. No one moved. Not by accident. Not because of a misunderstanding. Not because of a spilled drink. His eyes moved slowly across the guests. She was humiliated because people here believed her position made her pain unimportant. Clara felt the words enter her chest. For years, she had carried insults alone. In kitchens. In hallways. In hospital billing offices where clerks sighed at her questions. In homes where people praised her work but never remembered her name. But now, the quiet was not swallowing her. It was holding space for her. Dominic turned toward the bowl of broken glass. Some of you laughed. A man near the piano lowered his head. Some of you watched. A woman in emerald silk gripped her purse tighter. And some of you said nothing because silence was safer than decency. The room seemed to shrink around them. Dominic reached into his jacket and removed a small envelope. Every person in this room who recorded Clara Bennett's humiliation will delete the footage before leaving this house. Every vendor who shared private information about my staff has already lost Valenti business. Every guest who believes kindness is optional in my home will not be invited back. A nervous murmur rose. Dominic's voice cut through it. I am not finished. The murmur died. He turned to Clara. Miss Bennett, would you come here? Clara's heart beat hard enough to shake her breath, but she stepped forward. One step, then another. The same floor where she had knelt now carried her toward the center of the room. Dominic did not touch her. He did not guide her like she was fragile. He simply waited until she stood beside him. Then he faced the guests again. This is Clara Bennett, he said. She has worked in my house with discipline, patience, and more dignity than many people who entered it wearing diamonds. Clara's eyes burned, but she kept them steady. Dominic continued. Last night, she protected something sacred to my family after my own fiancé threw it away. A pause. Today, I am correcting more than one mistake. He turned to Mrs. Alvarez, who stepped forward with a folder in her hands. Dominic took it and placed it on the table beside Clara. Your mother's hospital account has been paid in full. Clara stopped breathing. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Dominic's voice softened, only slightly. And from this day forward, your position in this house is no longer Maid. He looked at the staff lining the wall. Clara Bennett will oversee household operations with Mrs. Alvarez. Her salary will reflect that responsibility. Anyone who has a problem taking direction from her may leave tonight. The staff did not move. Then Mrs. Alvarez began to clap. Softly at first. Then Ruth joined. Then the guards. Then, slowly, unwillingly, the guests. But Clara did not hear the applause clearly. She heard her mother's voice in her memory. Don't let rich people make you feel small, baby. Clara looked at Dominic. Why? She whispered. Dominic glanced at the silver brooch on his lapel. Because my mother would have asked me the same question if I didn't. For the first time that night, Clara smiled. Not wide. Not for show. Just enough to prove something inside her had survived. Dominic turned back to the room, and the applause faded. Remember this, he said quietly. A person's worth is not decided by where they stand in the room. His eyes swept over every bowed head. It is revealed by how they stand when the room tries to make them kneel. No one answered. No one needed to. Because that night, in a mansion built on fear, a woman in a gray uniform stood beneath a chandelier, while powerful people lowered their eyes before her. And that day, the world remembered what dignity looks like. Top of form, bottom of form.